I first started programming at I think age 11, and it was on a an XT, IBM PC XT. It wasn't IBM; it was a Zenith clone, and I got that given to me for free by somebody. And this was in 1998, so yeah, a little bit old there. It had a monochrome screen. I did it have graphics? I think it may have. Maybe it didn't even have graphics. Was it Hercules or was it MDA? Honestly don't remember, but whatever. Um, and I learned QBasic, and then later Quick Basic, which is more or less broadly similar, except it's compilable and has maybe like a couple of extra tidbits, but it's broadly the same. So so yeah, that was on DOS 5. Remember the keyboard had this software click sound that it would play, like you'd hold down the key and it would make a click sound because it would beep because the playing of the click was so slow that it would queue up and then the queue would empty and then it would beep and then you'd have to wait for the clicks to all play before you'd get any response. It was great. But I loved learning to program that like QBasic. And back then, of course, I was a terrible programmer and I had an ego the size of Jupiter, but I sucked at programming. But, you know, I wouldn't say I ever got any good at all in those days. Like, I probably didn't even get to decent. It took me a while to understand the fundamentals correctly. I had lots of misconceptions and things. But about a year later, I was given a 386. Oh, yeah, DX25. How much RAM did it have? I don't remember. I think I upgraded it at some point through there, but I don't know how much it had at first. What was common? 2 megs, 4 megs? I don't know, something. Um, so, and I programmed on that, and I had color. I had a VGA card. I think it was a super VGA card even, yeah. And a nice color VGA monitor and all that. And 100 meg hard drive that had been partitioned into two 50 meg partitions for some inexplicable reason. Like, who goes, I'm going to take this tiny hard drive and make it even tinier? Like, and the thing is, I couldn't actually remove the partitions and make it 100 megs again because, like, I had no other drive to back up my data onto while I wipe the partitions and repartition, right? Because you can't just like make it one partition without erasing your data. So you'd have to copy your data off there. And I didn't have any other medium that was 50 megs each or whatever where I could copy my data while I repartition the drive. So I literally couldn't change the partition. Except I think eventually maybe I was able to, because I think my stepdad had a zip disk and I put my 100 megs of stuff on there and then partitioned it eventually. But I don't know. It was pretty amusing. It was a WD Caviar 100 megs. Yeah. But when you're on DOS, 100 megs is enough. You know, you're just programming or whatever. And playing those old DOS games, Sierra and all that good stuff. And I bought a sound card for it too. It was an AdLib. They had a Sound Blaster, but for some reason I thought like an AdLib was better or something, so I bought it. And I guess AdLibs are not better; they're worse. Sound Blaster supports AdLib stuff and is better, but like whatever. At the time, I was like, "Yeah, I got an AdLib," and I played Commander Keen. It was amazing. But anyway, programming in QBasic, yeah. So I learned the very, very basics. Of course, QBasic, you know, basic. It's supposed to be like a higher level language. Now, by today's standards, QBasic is not really that high level. Like parts of it are, but I mean, you don't have to deal with pointers unless you explicitly tell it to, I think. But it kind of does memory management for you. I think it's just probably reference counted or something. I didn't even know what that was back then. I didn't know what memory management was. You just make stuff and it's like, oh. But so you don't learn about like low level stuff exactly, but compared to these days, Quick Basic is kind of low level in many ways, even if not always, because, you know, it didn't make me a great programmer automatically, but nor did it teach me any really bad habits, though, right? Like, it didn't teach me what you get taught now, which is that structure is the important thing, and you've got to make everything an object and have all this weird scaffolding that's nothing to do with the business logic. And, like, I didn't learn any of that. QBasic was just, you got subroutines, subs and functions, right? And you got modules, and then you just got code in there. It was very procedural. There's no objects. You could make so-called types, which I guess are like structs, maybe, kinda. But I didn't understand those at the time either. So, but yeah, very procedural. So it didn't teach me any objectionably bad habits. So when I It sort of it teaches you the important things about programming. You know, it teaches like, look, write the code that does this stuff. You know, the structure should serve the code. You shouldn't just masturbate structure all over and then you don't fucking know what you're even doing because you can't see any of the code that does stuff. No, you write the code that does the stuff. And that was an important thing that I learned, even if I didn't learn that much of super deep import back then. It didn't lead me badly astray, I guess. So a few years later, I wanted to learn something more modern, and I heard that Java was what everyone was using. So I got this book, How to Learn Java or whatever. I don't know what it was called. I don't remember. And I tried to set up Java on my mom's computer because she had the newer computer, and I couldn't set it up on my DOS machine. And tried to learn it, and I just couldn't. It was like totally inscrutable. It was talking about classes, and I didn't understand what the hell that even was, and why do you need them, and it was all this weird, complicated shit. And, like, granted, some of it I didn't understand because I was 11 or 12 or whatever, and a newbie programmer, but some of it I didn't understand because it was actually just terrible and unintuitive and horribly dumb. But you can't really tell the difference back then, and so I'm like, I don't understand this. I guess it's because I'm a dumb kid. I guess I'll wait till I'm an adult and then I'll understand this. But, I mean, I kind of understand OOP better now in concept, but the problem is OOP code is still incomprehensible to anyone because that's its nature. Well, OOP is a little vague. What I mean is, like, overboard, just having, like, all kind like facades and factories and all kinds of patterns that just, you go through 100 layers of cruft before you find anything that does something, and there's like one line that does something, and then it jumps all around 10 million times all over the place. Like, OOP was supposed to prevent spaghetti code, but it literally creates spaghetti code. But everyone's just such a fucking zombie that they don't even notice. They're like, no. But you know what? It's hard. Because after I tried to learn Java and gave up on it, I didn't really program for, many years. Not seriously, anyway. And I sort of picked it back up again in, like I wrote a little bit of VB6 in like the mid-2000s for a Jeezy Doom thing with voxels. Voxels are a thing I made up. Well, don't worry about it. And then when I went to write the very first version of AutoVid, I used VB6 because it's what I was used to, but then that's kind of old and doesn't run well on newer operating systems, so I eventually moved to VB.NET, and that was like a brick wall. I hit that, I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, VB6 is nice and makes sense, and VB.NET has got all these, like, dot this and objects and classes that. Like, what the hell? I'm just trying to get shit done. What is this crap where you have to write all this verbose code and instantiate things? And then I didn't know about garbage collection either, right? Because QBase, it didn't teach me about memory. I just thought it was magical and things just happened. So when you got the new keyword in VB and C# where you, like, construct an object, there's disposable objects where you have to explicitly dispose them, but most of them are not disposable. They just, like, the garbage collector disposes them automatically, but I didn't know that. So I was trying to create, like, a new array, and it's like, but I was like, but if I'm creating a new array, how does it get cleaned up? Like, I'm just newing up all over the place, and the memory doesn't get cleaned up with any explicit words. Like, what's going on here? And I thought that it would just leak memory, but no, it's the garbage collector. So that was a really difficult thing, learning the OOPy VB. So yeah, people say OOP is intuitive. I'm like, no, it fucking isn't, bro. Not to be. Like, I understand the idea of it more now, so I can sort of get, like, okay, maybe. But I grew up on procedural, and OOP was a fucking brick wall, so that happened. But the thing is, you know, my early VB and VB.NET code, again, was kind of like, it was better than my old QBasic code because it just had sort of more experience a bit and was older and smarter, I guess. But again, it wasn't great. Like, it was sort of bad, quote unquote, in several ways. Like, it was inept. It didn't understand the language maybe, and, you know, that sort of thing. But it also wasn't, it had its head in the right place. Even if it wasn't, I didn't have the experience to have it be, like, good. My head was in the right place. I wasn't like, I got to make all this weird structure and that's how you make good code. No, it was like, I just wrote the code that does the thing. And then Casey Muratori is, like, trying to teach that. And I'm like, but that's the obvious way to program, right? You write the code that does stuff, and then when you see code that's duplicated, you extract it into a function, and you build up from there. Like, it's super obvious. And he's like, having to call it catchphrasey names to get people on board, like, oh, it's compression-oriented programming. I'm like, okay, but that's just normal programming. And I think he would agree with that. But it's like so many people are taught differently than I was, I guess. Like, I was self-taught, so there's advantages to that, I suppose. But the thing is, when I was coding this, I would sort of like go and look on Google for how to do things in the language, and I decided at some point I wanted to make cleaner or nicer code, or like more properly standards conforming to standard of goodness code, or because I thought that that was a thing. Like, I'm just like, well, there must be like a proper good way to write code that I should conform to, and then it'll be good, which there really isn't. But well, there's guidelines, and they're usually not what you're taught. But anyways, so I go and look on and I search on the internet, just innocently, just searching like, how would I make my code better? And I come up with all this advice, which is all the stuff you know of, right? Like, it's all people saying like, oh, you got to make this bloated structure, and every app needs to look like this, and every app needs a good architecture, and architecture this, and structure and scaffolding that, and like what the hell is people are saying like, oh, even the tiniest WinForms app needs to literally be model view controller. I'm like, what the fuck? And the thing is, it's really hard. It's surprisingly difficult when you're a newbie programmer and you earnestly want to be good. And all these people, like everyone in the world is telling you, here's how you be good. And you're reading it, you're like, that doesn't sound right. That sounds unnecessary and bloated. And people are just telling you really confidently, no, this is how you write good code. It's good because good code is like, and they're not necessarily giving you super great explanations. They're sort of giving you hand wavy explanations, like, oh, what if in the future you do this? Or like, oh, you have to conform to this, to these, what is it? The principles. And here's design patterns, and these are good patterns, and like that, just like everyone's saying it, and so confidently, even when you know, okay, this is a bunch of wasteful bloat, but it's weirdly difficult to ignore it when you know at the same time these people seem like much more experienced, and so something in you is telling you shouldn't ignore them, but then another part is like, no, they're full of shit, but then you can't believe they could possibly be full of shit because they seem so experienced and there's so many of them, but no, yeah, they are kind of full of shit. So for a while I went off on that when I was making AutoVid, and the code is still a little bit like that, where I was trying to conform to all these patterns and putting properties instead of fields for no goddamn reason, and like doing all this weird architecture-y things. But eventually I was like, ugh, yeah, it's what I thought. You really don't need... You know, even AngelLoader has got like halfway of a model view controller implemented. Not the whole thing, but it's got like an interface to the UI so that the business logic doesn't know about it. Although the UI knows about the business logic a ton, so there's whatever. But I kind of just did that because like I'm like, I know, I just want to understand how you would make this and what the benefit is, like in a tactile fashion, because like people are just saying, and I kind of get the theory of it, but I knew that I didn't need it for AngelLoader, but I wanted to do it anyway so I could understand it better, and so, you know, there you go, it's still there. Honestly, I get if you've got an app that has two different UIs at the same time, like one for desktop and one for mobile, and you need to abstract it, that makes sense. But I'm not at all convinced of like, oh, what if you want to change a UI in the future? If you have the interface thing behind it, then it's super easy. I'm like, okay, not with WinForms. Okay, WinForms, if you change from WinForms to any other UI, first of all, you'll be changing from like MVP to MVVM anyway, which is different anyway, so you have to rewrite it anyway. Also, WinForms, your fucking problem with WinForms is not that there's business logic in the view. Your fucking problem with WinForms is that there's tens of thousands of lines that you will have to write that are specific to WinForms. It's not business logic, it's UI logic, to just hack around all of its shortcomings and make it do what the hell you want. And you're going to have to rewrite all of that in a new UI anyway, and that's going to be your major time sink. So I'm not at all convinced that the friction of having multiple interfaces with your view and your business logic would it all save you time, because like every time you need to communicate, you need to add another method in like 5 different fucking places and keep them all in sync and all that. It's a huge friction, and even if you change your UI framework, which you might never do, you have to rewrite the whole fucking thing anyway because it's WinForms. So yeah, I just don't know about that. But I mean, I get it has use cases, but like people need to be saying, does this actually have a use case? And if it does, is it my use case? Not just blindly obeying dogma, because programming is totally blind dogmatic religion. You'd totally think, like, no, surely programmers are going to be the most rational, thoughtful people who don't take bullshit. No, it's very, very blind cult-like. It's kind of interesting. But yeah, if you look at AngelLoader's code base, apart from the UI, because the UI is this nightmare massive mutable state and OOP patterns everywhere because it kind of has to be, because that's what you have to do to work with it. But apart from the UI, most of the code is written in a fairly straightforward procedural style. You know, there's awaits and stuff, async and await, which behind the scenes is like crazy and not really procedural exactly, but, well, I don't know. But it's written in that way visually, so, yeah, because, like, that's the obvious way to do it. You know, you don't have all these weird objects subclassing and linking to other stuff and constructors setting fields, and you got fucking weird patterns abstracting it even more so you can't even tell what anything's doing. It's like, why? Like, literally fucking why? You need to be able to read the code or you can't find bugs or understand it or understand why it fucking sucks in performance. Also, it's just dumb to do stupid code like that. Do the obvious fucking thing. And if your code actually needs some kind of abstraction or pattern, then do it then. But don't just be all like, you know? And the times when I use oopish sort of, like, okay, I've used, the scanner is one big, huge object. And that's mainly just for memory management purposes because it has a lot of things it needs to instantiate, but I don't want them to just stick around forever statically in the app because they're only to do with the scanner. So I want to clean up that memory when the scanner's done. But the scanner is one object and it reuses all its fields. And then the RTF to plaintext converter is one object, although that does have some inheritance going on, which is a bit hard to follow because I couldn't think of how else to have multiple versions of it at the time. I probably could if I thought about it, but I was like, meh. So that's that. But I mean, those are the exception, not the rule. Most of it's static classes abused as namespaces with just static methods or functions or procedures, if you want to call them. Because method, that's such a stupid... Why are OOP procedures called methods? That makes no sense. Like, that's not even grammatical. Like, you don't say car is a method of road. Car is a thing that goes on the road. It's a method of transporting you, but like a function is not a way of doing something. It is the something. Calling it a method sounds like it's one of many ways that you could accomplish what it accomplishes, but it's not. It's the only thing that does what it does. There's no other code that does what it does. So it's not a method. It's the thing itself. So it's super dumb to call it that. But anyways, functions, whatever. Functions, static, parameterized, and there's very, very, apart from the UI, which is a mess of mutable state because it has to be, there's actually very little mutable state in AngelLoader. There's the list of fan mission objects, and there's the config object, and then very little else. Hardly anything. There's lots of state that's immutable, but that's not a problem. You can shove that anywhere you want because it's immutable. The problem with mutable state is you don't know who the hell's accessing it or whatever. You can have all the immutable state you want. That's not problematic. So there's lots of static immutable state, but like mutable stuff, very, very rare apart from the UI. So like, I don't know. I think AngelLoader is mostly constructed in a fairly sane and straightforward way with a couple of exceptions that I could probably smooth over if I wanted. But it's the obvious way to do things. So like, I don't know. But the thing is, though, also, as I've been programming, I've been wanting to get, like, rather than getting more and more high level, I've been frustrated and wanting to get more and more low level because, like, the performance is just never good enough at a high level. When you're using framework, it's all convenient, but the stuff behind the scenes is a nightmare. There's allocations everywhere. It's like you look at the code and you go, oh my God, I could reuse this and reuse that and get rid of this thing because I don't need it. But you can't unless you copy paste the code out of the framework and modify it, which you sometimes can, but sometimes you can't for reasons. So, wow, this is rambly and blabbly. Oh, yeah. So yeah, basically these days I don't take anybody seriously and I just write code the obvious way, and only if I need to do something weird will I actually do it. Because I have confidence now. Like, I'm not a great programmer, really. I mean, I'm 10,000 times better than I was in 2011. I've come a very long way, but like I realize like I'm still an absolute nothing in the speck of the gods of programming or even the decent people in programming else. Because like I've never used a non-managed language. Well, I've written like 200 lines of C++ ever. That's the AngelLoader stub, but it's mostly just calling the standard library and not understanding what the hell I'm doing. It doesn't really matter if there's memory leaks. I'm pretty sure there aren't memory leaks. But even if there were, it doesn't matter because it quits in like 2 seconds anyway, or 2 milliseconds. So I feel like I'm not a real programmer until I learn to do manual memory management in C or whatever, or something like that, and write my own versions of stuff. Now, I did write my own RTF to plaintext converter. Now, is it fast? Well, it's about 250 to 290 megabytes per second over my 500 so file set, and that's pulling straight from memory, taking the I/O out of it. So that's 9 times faster than the rich text box method where you pass it in and then you access the text property, and it takes a quarter of the memory. So relative to that, it's extremely fast and efficient, but 290 megs a second, that's very slow for a parser. I mean, you should easily be able to get over a gig if you do it properly. But then again, RTF is more complicated than JSON, I think, so like maybe not, I'm not sure. Sort of dependency change, who knows, but like, it's still a lot faster than the alternative, so I'm still proud of it. And so, you know, I'm getting better, but like I just keep wanting to go lower level, not higher, because I'm just frustrated and I want performance. I love tuning for performance and for efficiency, like getting rid of allocations, getting rid of memory use sometimes, although you can often use more memory to get more performance and still be reasonable about it. So using the minimum memory isn't like such a goal anymore. You want to be more balanced about it, but yeah, getting rid of allocations and speeding things up, getting rid of unnecessary code, and like, because it's like an awesome puzzle game, right? It's like saying, okay, I've got this code that does the thing I want, but there's always some hidden, like the structure of it, it might look like everything needs to be there, but there's always some hidden way you could restructure it to remove certain things. There's always more assumptions you can make that you don't realize you can make. And when you get this epiphany, you're like, oh, shit, I realize I can make this assumption here, like I'm doing this duplicate work here. It's a really fascinating puzzle, so I like doing that. And AngelLoader is very performance tuned, even though it's still too slow because of reasons like WinForms and whatever. But I've done a lot of work to make it fast, including lazy loading frickin' everything I possibly can on startup. Notice the newer versions of AngelLoader are pretty fast on startup. So there's that. And my voice is kind of wearing out now, so I guess I'm done this babble. But like, I wanted to talk about programming and what my sort of philosophy is, which is basically total pragmatism. That's why I like Ginger Bill's philosophy quite a lot, because it's also very pragmatic. And Odin is pretty much a very reality-based language. They're like, look, we don't really have any sort of ideologies here. We're doing what is good by actual metrics. And I'm like, great job. I want to learn Odin, but probably won't, because I'll probably just die first. Anyway, that's all for today, so bye.